but you are here to talk about appointing a CEO and making sure that we get that right. I'm Sam Sadeghi. I'm the Director of Trust Governance here at CST. And this morning, I'm going to be joined by Malcolm Trobe, who is our absolute guru on appointing CEOs. Malcolm, do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Malcolm Trobe. I work as a CSC consultant, and I'm also chair of Archway Learning Trust, which is a Church of England trust in the East Midlands that has community and church schools. And I've recently gone through the experience of appointing a CEO as a chair, and I've worked with some other trusts on appointing, not in appointing their CEO.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. All right. So we know that this is probably one of the most important things that a board will do, right? Choosing the right CEO for the trust will determine it will influence the organization's fortunes, as the Chartered Accountants of Canada said so eloquently. So because it's so important, it's really important to get it right and to make sure the process is as robust as possible. I wanted to share with you some of the what the picture looks like in the sector at the moment. This is from our school trust survey that we do every year with CEOs, and it's about 400 CEOs who responded to this survey. And you can see 13% are saying succession planning for exec leaders, one of their top five strategic priorities. 34% of CEOs have been in role for 5 to 9 years. And so the ones who are on the 9 year end, there's a suggestion there that they may not be in role for that much longer. 40% of boards have no succession plan. And 16% of the CEOs that we surveyed were considering retiring in the following year. So if you translate that into numbers, that's 338 CEOs, if they all actually do retire, that we would need to recruit. So this is definitely a live issue for us in the sector, hence why we need to think about it really carefully. So at this point, I'm just going to hand over to Malcolm to actually walk you through all the bits that you need to think about with appointment, starting with the timeline. Malcolm, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I mean, 338, that's a really scary number because I mean that's nearly one a day.
It's a
I mean,
lot.
including weekends, unfortunately. What I'm trying to do is just walk you through the process and give you an overview. There's no way in the time that we've got available we can go into all of the details, but what I'll try and do is highlight some of the key considerations that the trustees have got to make. So if we think initially of the timeline, there are a lot of variables here that happen in the process. But I think a good starting point is to think about it as a sort of the 12-week program. Holiday periods, half terms get in the way and are likely in many cases to extend it. And you can actually compress the period, the process if you want. But it is really, really difficult, I would suggest, to compress it to anything shorter than 8 weeks, even if the board is pretty well prepared in advance for the process. You can get some advantages and you also have disadvantages by shortening the process. You don't want to lose, if you have a lengthy process, you don't want to lose strong candidates going out to other organizations at the same, who are advertising at the same time. But at the same time, you want an efficient and effective process. It's going to allow enough time for candidates to absorb the information, get their applications in. You want to trawl widely and attract several strong candidates. One of the key things is how quickly can the board meet initially to make its first decisions. And it'll probably need more than one meeting to agree the plan and also to set out some of the key principles that lie behind what they want from their new CEO. And as Sam said, the appointment of the CEO, it's probably the most important decision the board will make. And most boards in their lifetime will only ever go through the process once. So it's not a process they'll have a great deal of experience in. I would suggest that getting the plan and the process right is critical. As many things, getting the plan sorted is really critical. And that's where external advice can be invaluable. And one of the early decisions that the board will have to make is whether to engage any outside support, and if so, at what level. So there are those key decisions that need to be made. And then the rest of the process, you're pretty well familiar with: long listing, short listing, selection, references, checks. And in this case, because the CEO is a board appointment, there would have to be a recommendation from the selection panel to the board and approval by the board. As I said, that planning and preparation stage is critical. So the board have got a lot of important decisions to make at the start of the process. Can we move on, Sam? One of those is the fact that the board itself can't work as a full board to run the process. It would be completely unwieldy. So it's going to need a committee to do that on behalf of the board. It needs to be a formally constituted committee. It can't be an ad hoc committee. It needs to be a formally constituted committee of the board with a clearly delegated authority and function. In some cases, you may already have a nominations committee, which is there to look at the process of appointing trustees. If you have one, just check whether its delegated powers also includes doing the work about the appointment of the CEO or members of the executive team. If not, you'll need to set up a nominations committee, and you may need to amend your scheme of delegation or put an appendix into your scheme of delegation to set out what their authority is. But as I said at the beginning, there's quite a few things that the board will need to go through before it hands things over to the nominations committee. You know, what type of person are we looking for? Do we need somebody who's been a head teacher, has gone through the education route? Or are we going to look more widely, as in fact we're seeing many trusts do now? Do we actually want to stick to the same role descriptor and job description that we've already got? Are we going to review that? Do we need to make any other changes? While seeing as several trusts now are no longer having their CEO as a trustee, and they make that change when they appoint a new CEO. And that may in itself mean a change in the articles is needed. You may be in a trust that has special requirements. We're at Archway, we're a faith trust, so we had to consult the diocese. Other trusts, you may have a sponsor. You've got to think about the contractual arrangements. If you've got an educationist, are you going to want them on the school teacher's pay and conditions? Or do you want to move them onto a 52-week contract? All the implications then for the pension scheme. What about the salary? Have we recently carried out benchmarking? Do we need to go through a benchmarking arrangement again? My note says, do you need a comms plan? Actually, I think you do need a comms plan, because having a plan how you're going to communicate this, both internally and externally, right from the beginning of the announcement of the CEO, going right through literally to the first day the CEO takes up place. So all of those and probably a bit more needs to be done by the board before it hands over to the nominations committee to coordinate and run the process. Nominations committee would normally be run by the chair, but availability of chair may be a factor, and it may need to go to another member of the board. Ideally, you'll have an odd number of trustees on that nominations committee. Hopefully, everything will be done by consensus, but it may be possible, it may be necessary, unfortunately, on some occasions to take a vote. So you're looking at a minimum of 3. You don't want too many, because otherwise the process can get quite cumbersome. So the nominations committee will take you through from the planning process through the long listing, the short listing, and they'll be the consistent group that's engaged in the selection process, the interview process. All of this is designed so what the nominations committee can do is make that confident recommendation to the board. It's also useful in the process to have agreed what communication is going to happen between the nominations committee and the board, during that process, because there may well be a board meeting in that period of time, but you're going to want the trustees, all the trustees, to feel they know what's going on in the process. So one of the things you have to do is draw all of the information together and produce a candidate pack for the potential candidates.
Malcolm, before we move on to the pack, which is the next slide, here we go. Um, about panels that do the interviews, what's the relationship between the panel that does the interviews and the nominations committee? Same people, different people?
And normally you would have your consistent body is your nominations committee. So they in all probability would be carrying out the final interview process. But you may involve other groups, and I'll come on a bit later
Okay,
on to talk through the activities that may go on during the selection process. But
okay,
you can use other people through the selection process, and they would be feeding information in to the nominations committee. But the nominations committee would be the group that would carry out the final, I suppose you would probably a final presentation, final interview, and they would make their decision. You may use other people potentially as a working with a wider group of candidates to produce a shortlist if you've got a large enough field.
got it. Thank you.
So the quality of talking about the candidate pack, the information to candidate is really, really important. You want a professional pack. Um, you're going to have the information about the trust, its schools, and the operational details of the selection process as you would have in any information pack to any candidate for a post within the trust. But what I would say most importantly, it has to speak to potential applicants about what the trust is about. What are the trust values? What's its vision? What's its mission? What's the sense of purpose about the trust? What's the direction that the trust is going in? What are its expectations as a trust? And what are its expectations of its incoming, its new CEO? So you put a lot of that often in an introductory letter from the chair that indicates the type of person that the trust is looking to appoint. So the tone and the information of the pack is there. What you're trying to do is bring in applications from those candidates that are going to be a good fit for the role in your trust, but somehow also indicate that this might not be a good fit for what others want to go, because you don't want a whole load of people applying who are not going to be a good fit for the post. All the standard information will need to be in there: role and job description, the person spec, all the background and contextual information about the trust and its schools, how the people make further inquiries, who they need to speak to for further information. In most cases, that will be the chair or the chair of the nominations committee who would actually feed that information rather than any of the executive team or any of the staff of the trust. What the arrangements are, if you're going to have any pre-application visits, the application form, what you want in a letter of application, and certainly specify the length of the letter of application, closing date, selection process outline, and the dates of the selection process, the interview dates, so that people know when they're going to be, so if necessary, they can try to keep them clear in their diary. So overall, good, clear information needed, attract a strong pool of candidates that are going to be a good fit for the trust, because getting the appointment right first time is really, really helpful. It saves time, effort, and money. And I can say that as a chair of a trust that had to go to a second advert. There's an awful lot of work involved if you have to go out a second time. But the key thing is getting the right person for your trust at the time that you're at. So that leads us on to thinking about what about this selection process.
So, Malcolm, before you move on to that, we have a question about the role of members in the selection process. And I mean, I think, Dave, you've already got it, which is that you just report the outcome to members. It's not their responsibility to appoint the CEO. It's the responsibility of trustees.
Yeah, they would essentially, you would engage with the members and inform them of the process, but they have no active role within the process. You would inform them of the process. There are similar issues with church schools because you've got to involve the diocese.
Mm,
They have, in the case of church schools, they have a right to have an advisor in the meeting,
mm.
but they are not there in any voting capacity or vetoing capacity. The decision on the appointment of the CEO is a decision that rests with the trust board.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay.
So if we look at the selection process, the nominations committee, as I said before, will be the people that coordinate and run the process, and they would be the final appointing panel. How are you going to organize it? For many, it's a two-day process, a sort of long listing day, and then a final shortlisting day, working with the selected shortlisted candidates. If you can get a wide field, you may well want to have 2 days with a long list, separate days, so you've got a wide field. And if that's the case, are there going to be consecutive days, or are you going to have a gap in between? So all of those activities, all of those need to be planned out. And then you're going to have to look at the activities that are going to be engaged in order to evaluate the candidates against the requirements of the post. You've also got to check their experience that they give in their information or their CV. Also an opportunity then for face-to-face contact, which may not have been available beforehand, for them to have further questions about an exploration about the trust, because appointment processes are always two-way activities. It's the trust deciding if that person is a good fit for the trust, and the person deciding if the trust is the right fit for them in terms of their next step in their career. So you're going to put in a whole host of activities. They can include competency-based and wider interviews, analytical exercises, presentations, media activities. We did one with a radio and a television interview as part of our process. Discussions, stakeholder groups. So you're going to use pupils, head teacher group, any of the executive team views that involve them in the process. Strategic planning consideration discussions. A number of trusts now are also using psychometric tests designed to measure a person's capabilities and behavioral style. They're becoming more used in recruitment to senior posts. They are very informative. We did use them, but they are, however, relatively expensive. But they do give a great deal of information. The process has to be consistent and fair, so the same process for all candidates. There needs to be some specific care if you have internal candidates for the post, because the process must be fair to them and must be fair to outside candidates. Not only must it be fair, it must be perceived to be fair, and that's an important aspect of consideration. Needs to be a clear scoring or ranking process supported by evaluative statements that provide evidence based on the decision that the nominations committee is going to make, to give assurance to the board about the fact that it has been a rigorous, robust process to select the right candidate. As I said, a lot depends on getting the decision right. A poor appointment, disruptive to the trust, and significant additional cost. So to draw together some of the considerations, if we look at some of these considerations for the candidate, you're doing everything you can do to ensure you get a good fit. You're looking at the alignment of the values with the trust values. You're checking that they've got the appropriate experience, knowledge, skills that are going to take the trust forward in the desired strategic direction. As we said before, do you need an educationalist? What are the key requirements for the trust at this stage? How might they change over the next 3, 4, 5 years? And how does that influence the type of person you're looking for? Do you need a new set of fresh eyes? Do you need a set of fresh eyes looking at the trust? Perhaps particularly if you've got a foundation CEO who's been in post some time leaving. Do we want to change the way in which the trust executive team operates? How do we handle internal candidates, their expectations? What's the impact of having on other candidates when you've got internal candidates? And if obviously if you're a faith school, you've got the faith school requirements and sponsor school requirements to take place. Externally, well, you have to consult with the regional director if you're going to when you're actually making this process. So you need to set up a communications system with the regional director, and that would normally be done by the chair. They will ask certain questions in all probability, and it may rely on the board taking stock of the situation. The board has to consider what is best for the trust, and that may mean considering a merger. And this is something that the RD may raise, particularly if you are chairing a small trust and they're thinking about, well, actually, do we want another CEO coming into a small trust, or would it be better for this trust to merge? However, as I think we all know, potentially that's a complex situation to manage in itself and can be rarely achieved quickly. But the RD is going to want to know about your plans for the recruitment process. What happens if there's no time to make a permanent appointment? What interarrangements will you need to make? If you're making interarrangements, how long for? And how will you communicate this? And what's the implications of making interim arrangement? How might that affect the application process going forward? You obviously need to appoint an accounting officer. If you have a deputy CEO who is already in post and then steps up to the CEO, how will that impact on people's view about applying for the post? Are they going to see, I've known it's happened in 2 or 3 trusts where known people not apply because they thought the deputy was a shoo-in. So how do you handle that sort of situation? Faith sales, yeah, we mentioned the diocese and sponsored schools with their sponsor. And as I said earlier, it's really, really important to have a communications plan for the whole period. Most of the HR issues, I think people will be very familiar with. You need to be very aware of resignation periods. It's worth asking applicants, for their notice period in the application form, because some people will have very lengthy notice periods nowadays. All the usual safer recruitment arrangements have to be in place. It's really helpful if the chairs complete the safer recruitment training. Helpful actually in reality if all the nominations committee have done that, but you must have at least one of the panel trained, and everybody should have received full HR advice on it. And as I mentioned earlier, you need to determine the required contractual arrangements and salary level. Whether you do that how much you do that tightly in advance, or how much you leave some flexibility to be discussed with potential applicants during the interview process, is a decision that you also have to make. So one of the early questions you ask yourself is, can we do this all ourselves internally, or do we need any advice and assistance? So what advice and assistance might you need? How much of it can we do internally? How strong's our own HR function within the school to support the process? And do we actually want to engage our own HR function at all in the process? Do we want to keep them out of it? What I would say is advice and support, it's a continuum. It goes from one hand doing everything internally to, on the other hand, handing it all over to an executive search agency to gather the candidates for the shortlisting by the nominations committee, planning the assessment centre with the nominations committee, essentially holding the trustee's hand all the way through the process. There are advantages and disadvantages all the way across that spectrum. Seeking guidance at a basic level should at least ensure that no fundamental mistakes are made. And no matter what the approach is taken, it's important, though, that the board stays in control of the process. So even if you're outsourcing a lot of the process on potentially using an executive search agency, the board still has to remain in control. If you go to an executive search agency, they will undoubtedly have a number of candidates on their books already. But you're still going to have to go through the advertising process. That's something that the regional office will insist on. Search agencies will look to headhunt candidates who may not actually be looking for CEO posts at that time. You'll save internal time by going outside for that support, and they'll handle all the processing. But of course, it comes at a cost, often quite a significant cost, and there's a need to manage the perceptions about handing the process over or part of the process over to an external agency. I'm not in any way criticizing executive search agencies. They're wholly professional organizations, but they are commercial organizations and do come at a significant cost. They also have their processes and ways of doing things. So it's really important that the nominations committee ensures they remain in control of that process. And no matter what you go in terms of that, of looking at someone else to search candidates out for you, there's no guarantee that you're going to get a better outcome than you would have got through doing it yourself, although you may well have increased the candidate field. If you're going outside and using anything in terms of outside support, you need to check that you've got a really tight contract with a supplier. Because one of the issues that can emerge is if you don't appoint first time round, you can end up with significant additional costs if you're having to go out for a second time. So you need someone who's you need a legal check basically on the contract there. If you're working with outside agencies, you've got to give a lot of time still over to informing them about what you are actually looking for. But again, even with an outside agency, the majority of the detail work will need to be done by the chair of the nominations committee in giving information to potential candidates. So one of the early decisions I say at the beginning that boards need to make is to the level of support and advice they will need, if any, because the key thing is you want a really successful outcome. You want to see the right person for your trust at this stage. Sam?
Over to you. This one.
Oh, okay, right. Well, one of the less pleasant tasks someone's got to do is always tell unsuccessful candidates they're not getting the post. It's a real professional courtesy to actually give people feedback and the aspects that they may want to work on if they're applying for a similar post in the future. If you've got an external advisor working on the post, this is something that they will pick up on. If not, it tends to be down to the nominations committee share. And it has to be fair and balanced feedback, evidence-based, because from my experience, people do really value getting clear feedback because it helps them in their own professional and personal development. Um, Comms, I think I said a lot about it already. The board, I think, needs a communication plan that covers both internal relationships and external, and that has to run through the whole process. Because you might get to the end and think, oh, we made the decision, we'll tell people about, we've appointed, you know, John or Jenny to this post as a CEO. Well, hang on, they've got to manage their comms at their end because you can't necessarily tell everybody straight away. You have to tie the communications in with the announcement at the other end, and you've got to give them time to sort that out. So you're getting a coordinator. So having a communications plan right the way through the process is really, really important. Um, so you need to give a bit of a forethought also to the handover arrangements and the induction arrangements. But you've given a bit of thought to that uh, as you're going through the process. Or that's when you need to have more detailed discussions with the outgoing CEO. I've not mentioned the outgoing CEO much in the whole process because you have to make a decision as a board whether you're giving potential candidates the opportunity to discuss things with the outgoing CEO and at what stage of the process are you going to engage them, because they have no active role whatsoever in the whole of the appointment process. So
Okay. Brilliant. That's such a lot of fantastic amount of information you've got, and it is definitely a complex endeavor. I'm going to hand over to Rakia just to describe this. Then we're going to stop recording and we'll go to your questions that were in the chat.
Brilliant, thanks, Sam. So yeah, we just wanted to come in for a couple of minutes. I won't take up too much of your time to highlight that we do have support services around this. It is obviously quite a complicated and potentially challenging process. Takes a lot of time from trustees. So working with Malcolm as our guru, as Sam said at the start, we've developed a service to kind of sit alongside this process, very much tailored to each trust and each nomination committee's requirements. So we could kind of support with that initial development strategic planning phase. We could support all the way through to the appointment, or we could just come in and look at particular areas where you feel you need that additional kind of capacity and external insight into the work that you're doing. We've pulled out our CEO mentoring service there as well. Obviously for somebody new to post, they may find it really beneficial to have that mentoring support from a former CEO who's kind of walked through that process before. And again, we can be very flexible in how that mentoring is structured. We can offer it over the period of the first year if it's for somebody who's entirely new to the role and wants that support in place, or we can offer it on a shorter term basis if there are particular challenges that are new to that CEO. So maybe managing growth or managing a period of change and kind of really focus the mentoring support around that. And then the final service we just wanted to flag in this was around our executive performance reviews. So as Malcolm said kind of right at the start, if you are considering revising the role description and kind of job description for your CEO, that's a really good opportunity to also think about how that aligns with your wider performance management process. So we have a team of consultants who can support you in both the kind of development of that as a process and management system, but also act as an external advisor through the reviews and interim review conversations as well. So if any of that sounds of interest, or if you have any other governance related support needs, please do get in touch with us. We're always very happy to have a conversation.
Amazing. Thank you, Rakia, and thank you, Malcolm, for all of that fantastic information.